Hi, and welcome to my channel, Laura's Library Card. So this is my January wrap-up video, and I am going to kind of blah 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 mental health discuss for a moment, and then talk about some January stats, and then go through the books. So I will try to leave timestamps for everything that I talk about in this video down in the description. Feel free to use those to jump around. So what do I mean by blah blah mental health? I mean that I have done some self-reflection in January, and basically, everyone has finite resources when it comes to time and effort and energy. And I was kind of realizing that there were certain areas of my life where I was not putting in as much effort and time as I needed to be. And a lot of that comes down to like me getting enough sleep, but I feel like booktube has like taken over my life so much that that is where all of my free time goes. And I also just want to have some time occasionally to like watch TV or do something that is completely sort of low effort but that requires my time. And there are other areas of my life where I need to put more effort in. So what does this have to do with me talking to you on camera? This means that like I'm going to be making booktube content that I care about. And when I was kind of prepping for this video, writing down the books that I read in January, I was trying to make this list concise and write a one sentence description and make sure I included the character names so that I could like go through my January books. And then I was like, oh, why should I make an effort to make this video like shorter if I want to actually talk about these books? So I'm going to be still making content on booktube, but it's going to be less consistent. And you're like, Laura, you weren't consistent to begin with. And I'm like, I know. But it's going to be less consistent. There's going to be less editing, and it's going to be more just me talking, because that was the point of me starting my channel, was to connect with people. And I feel like I have been sort of sucked into doing the content that is sort of expected every month. And so I'm gonna maybe try out new things, do vlogs. I always really enjoy tags, so I might do more tag videos. I just wanna like do what I wanna do. So cool. That's my rambling has completed. Let's discuss January. January was January was kind of like a hit and miss, because I liked most of the books that I read in January. I feel like overall I did pretty well, considering my average rating was a 3.3, which is completely on par with all of 2020. I think that was my average for the whole year. So I feel like I am reading books that I'm generally enjoying. I finished 9 books. I DNF'd 2 books. I read 3,822 pages. Not that I really care about numbers. Actually, Ashley from Bookish Realm did a really interesting discussion video not that long ago about how booktube as a community is kind of like focused on numbers, and should we be doing that? I'll leave that down in the description. But the downside of January was that I realized at the end that I actually did sort of terrible when it comes to diversity of the authors that I read. So that was bad. I also kind of started the year in a little bit of a slump. I only finished 2 books before January 15th, and like everything else was the second half of the month. So I'm not really sure what was happening there. But anyway, so yeah, I did a couple historical romances, only finished 1, 3 contemporary romances, 2 literary fiction books, I only finished 1, a thriller, a graphic novel, a YA fantasy, and an adult fantasy. So yeah, so I feel like stats wise, I was like pleased with the books that I read, and I felt like they were diverse in genre, and I was happy with my page count, as much as numbers matter to me. But I was very disappointed in my own diversity component, and that is something that is already changed for February because of the first couple books I finished, but it's something I want to be more cognizant of at the time of my TBRs and throughout the month, not just kind of like at the end of the month. So you live and you learn. So yeah, I already mentioned that I kind of had a slump in the start of the month, but now I'm going to start talking about books. So the first book that I finished in 2021 was Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reid. This is the second book in the Game Changers series. I had not read the first book. I actually found this book because I was trying to look up The Rivalry, I think by Nikki Sloan. That had been recommended and I thought it sounded good. So I was looking that up, but it was not available immediately through my library, and Heated Rivalry was. And then once I read the description for Heated Rivalry, I thought, I think I've heard about this before. I feel like it was recommended. I want to say it was recommended by Jamie at Library Says, but I can't confirm that. So Heated Rivalry is a male-male contemporary romance, a sports romance. I listened to it on audio, and it's all about hockey. We follow Ilya and Shane. Those are our two main characters. Shane is Canadian, Ilya is Russian. They're approximately the same age and both super into hockey, both really good at hockey. So they like meet like right around late high school, age 18. They both know that they're both really good at hockey. And so there's kind of some natural competitiveness there. And then they ultimately go on to be rivals on when they're on official sports teams as their job and are professional players. Their teams are huge rivals, and the media has always portrayed them as like enemies and like huge rivalry, and they like hate each other. But in actuality, they have that's not really the case. They're sort of ambivalent toward each other. And then Shane and Ilya are attracted to each other, and then they kind of like start acting on that. So this book is a sort of rivals to lovers, enemies to lovers. And like they start off their relationship and it's just physical, like it doesn't mean anything. And then over the course of the book, they fall in love. So I enjoyed this book. I felt like I was a little anxious at the start because the prologue really seems to put Shane in this like dark place where he's just like full of a lot of self-loathing and stuff, but I didn't feel like that was really an issue throughout the rest of the book. It also follows a good number of years, and so we just kind of like do a lot of like time jumps where it's like 6 months later, the next time they meet up. So this story is definitely steamy, very explicit and deliciously steamy. And I feel like the first like 40% or so is kind of slow, but we do get to see more and more of their interactions. And I really felt like it was an enjoyable kind of slow build up and slow burn when it comes to the emotional side of things. To the physical side of things, like that starts right away. Heads up. I do feel like ultimately, I wish I would have seen a little bit more of Ilya's point of view. I felt like it was kind of clear. I felt like Shane's progression of emotions was much more clear and developed, whereas Ilya's like, I wanted just a little bit more from him. But ultimately I was really happy with the sort of like bleak moment, how the third act, problem happens because the two of them kind of stuck it out together and like work together on the problem instead of like it being a conflict that pulls the two of them apart. And so I just really felt like that was great because it like establishes and sort of puts that final like official I don't want to say nail in the coffin, but like, yes, they're officially in love. Boom. Yeah. I definitely want to read more about this author. I am going to hopefully get to more books in the series, and the trigger warnings for all of the books that I talk about are all linked in my Goodreads reviews. So check down the description for the links to my Goodreads reviews for each of these books. But I didn't really feel like there was any huge terrible issues, or else I'll say it verbally here. Ultimately, I gave Heated Rivalry a 4.5? A 4.3 stars. The second book that I read in January is actually one that I DNF'd. This is Tony's Wife by Adriani Trigiani. This was a literary fiction book that I was reading for one of my real life book clubs, and I was listening to the audiobook and I got about 40% of the way in and I DNF'd it. And that's partly because I didn't leave myself enough time to finish it before the book club meeting, but also it was like kind of boring for me. I didn't feel like it followed the blurb. The blurb makes it seem like it's like two young singer performers fall in love during the 1940s. Like, will they survive the war, and the like, how will their singing career happen if like they're in love and they maybe start a family? And I was like, okay, potentially interesting. And at 40% they like weren't even in a relationship yet, so I was like, okay. I just didn't feel like it had enough like atmosphere to keep me reading, and I just kind of found it boring, and so did the other people in my book club. So yeah, the main characters were Chi-Chi and Tony, and I felt like it had a really strong start. The first like 2 chapters were really good, but then just kind of like after that. And so ultimately I just didn't finish Tony's Wife, and I did read enough that I felt like it was worth a rating from me, so I personally gave it a 2.2 stars. The next book that I read in January I finished, and this was a historical romance. I read Mr. Cavendish, I Presume by Julia Quinn. This is one of the 2 books in the duology, Two Dukes of Wyndham. They can theoretically be read concurrently, or it doesn't matter which one you read first. I read this for the Rake Appreciation Society, and this kind of was the final like nail in the coffin for me as to my feelings on historical romance. I just didn't really like this book. We follow Amelia and Thomas are like love interests, and they have been betrothed forever, and then like now that time is sort of coming near is the time setting of this book. So it's like dual point of view, and even though we start off with Amelia being all like, well, I don't love him, she pretty much already has feelings for him and doesn't need any further interactions with him. They have 2 more interactions. She's like, I love him. And I thought, why? Like, I didn't feel like her emotional development was poor. I did not agree that enough had happened, that they had interacted enough for her to be in love with Thomas. Thomas had his own shit going on. Like, he didn't think about Amelia at all, didn't care for her. He was just like some woman he was gonna marry someday, and he had a lot of his own conflict happening. And that was sort of the other part of this book, is that the book is a romance, but also a huge chunk of the plot and the action is another story that's not a romance related. It's whether or not Thomas is the Duke, and like, is he or isn't he? And he is totally understandably occupied with that mystery and what's happening with that. So like, I get that, but it seemed that Amelia for him was this afterthought. Like, they shared a couple kisses and 1 or 2 conversations, and then he, by the end of the book, is like, well, I love her. I'm glad that we're gonna be together. And they have sex, and it's like on like a lawn somewhere, and it was off. I did not enjoy this book. I have decided historical romance is not really my thing. It will be something I read sparingly going forward. I never really felt like I got to know either Amelia or Thomas as like well-rounded characters, and by all accounts, I think I read the wrong book as this duology, because I didn't like this one so much that I didn't even read the other one. So, but it seemed like everyone else kind of liked the other book a little bit better. And I really feel like the problem with historical romance is because there's societal pressure and there's all these rules in place, it really limits the amount of communication and interaction that can happen between our characters usually. So because there's chaperones and like they're not, it's all, politeness. And so it's like, to me, that emotional development is key and 100% important in my caring about a relationship developing. And I feel like in most historical romances I've read, like that part doesn't happen, and therefore I am not satisfied with romance. So that is all my feelings about that. The next thing that is on my list is the second historical romance of January. I did not finish the book How the Dukes Stole Christmas. This is an anthology of historical romance. I think they're all historical romance books that have to do with dukes. Tessa, Sarah McLean, a couple other authors. And I only listened to the first story, which was a Tessa story. And that's partly because I got this book like on Christmas Day, and then by the time I was getting around to listening to the audiobook, it was like mid-January, and I was kind of like over Christmas spirit. But yeah, I didn't even remember that first story. I remembered liking it, but like I couldn't remember anything about it, so I had to look it up. And that one is Tessa Dare's story. We follow a young woman whose family is in danger of, my brain is saying extinction, and that's not the right word. Eviction. Eviction. Okay, her family is going to be evicted from their house, and she basically needs to land herself a wealthy husband so that they can like pay the guy who owns the house a crap ton of money, or else they're going to be evicted. And so it's like this story follows one magical night where she's trying to land herself a wealthy husband, and ultimately, of course, she spends this like one time at the ball and then after the ball with the guy who actually does own their house, and they fall in love, blah blah blah. It was like perfectly fine. I did not give How the Duke Stole Christmas as the anthology a rating because I only read one out of the 4 stories. For me, that specific story was perfectly fine, but I don't really like novellas and I don't really like historical romance, so you know, not great. I would probably give that individual story a 2.5 middle of the road. So those were my 2 DNFs. I already covered both of those. So the rest of January are books that I finished. The next book that I finished was The Roommate by Rosie Danan. I'd seen this kind of going around on BookTube. This is a contemporary romance story. I had the ebook, and it's very sexually explicit. It's very, other tropes that we see are like opposites attract, like the prude and the porn star, like rich and poor. I guess a lot of those are all opposites. But so like in this one, we follow Clara and Josh is the other love interest. And I felt like the premise of this book was kind of weak because Clara like drops her whole life and comes across the country to move in with her longtime crush and childhood best friend. And he like changes his mind and says, oh, by the way, I'm going on tour. Your room's all set up and ready. He tells her that as he picks her up from the airport. And so she feels like dumped by this guy, even though they weren't together romantically. And I felt that was sort of a weird start to the book because yes, we're sympathetic toward Clara and the situation she's in, but like we didn't have any time to get to know Clara or get to know this guy Everett. So like Clara is like pining after this guy, and yet I didn't care about him at all. And so the other, Everett has made arrangements for his own room to be rented out while he's off on tour with this band. And so that's how Clara and Josh are thrown together. And Josh is in the adult entertainment industry, and she's this like uptight socialite, and they're in forced proximity because they're living together. And I did appreciate that the two of them, though they were attracted to each other, they were very like emotionally vulnerable with each other because they both were convinced that nothing could ever happen between the two of them. So like they were really open with each other. They shared their worries. They shared some of their vulnerabilities that they might not have otherwise revealed so early on in their acquaintanceship, just because they were like, well, this is just like a roommate. He's just my friend. I can be real with him. So I appreciated that. But I also was kind of like really annoyed at the like reasons or logic behind why they think they can't be with the other one. Because like she's too good for him, and she doesn't think she's sexy / she's like, I have a reputation to uphold. And to me, those were just kind of like reasons, especially in a contemporary setting. I will say that the sexy times were sexy. I quite enjoyed them. There was also an element of like pro women and pro women's pleasure, and pro like sex positivity. And I really appreciated all of those elements, but I'm not sure how that it worked super well with the romance part, because I wanted to see more between Josh and Clara specifically, as opposed to their goals of producing content for like the masses with this project. Though I do feel like them going into business together sort of more clarified reasons why they shouldn't be together. But yeah, I feel like the book was about to expire, so I kind of really raced my way through the last like third, and maybe I was reading a little bit too fast, but it sort of felt like we were skipping over bits, or I didn't like fully understand at the end why they had this whole bleak moment and were upset with each other and separated, and so I could not enjoy their reconciliation. But ultimately, I enjoyed the book. I just felt like it wasn't like amazing, and it wasn't. It could have done a little bit. Could have been like tighter in its editing and its craftsmanship. So ultimately, I gave The Roommate only a 2.5 stars. But I would recommend trying it out just because I felt like it was very interesting to have that undercurrent of the like porn star life, and the discussions about like sex positivity was a really great element, I think. The next book that I finished was The Dutch House. This is a literary fiction book by Patchett. I listened to this on audiobook, and honestly, like, that was sort of the best part, was that it was narrated by Tom Hanks. I was listening to it for a book club, and it was just kind of really meh for me. We follow Danny is our main character, and he is like the most unimaginative and uncurious person ever. Like, he doesn't think to ask any questions, and then later when information is revealed to him, he's like, well, how come I was never told that? And I was like, because you've never asked a single question in this entire book. And the one good thing is that he basically is telling this story as a sort of, it's almost like a love story about his sister. Like, he's talking about his life, but how important his sister, the role that she played in his life. But there's also these themes about like motherhood and like abandonment, and like what you choose to do with your life and what you choose to make of yourself. But like, I didn't feel like the motherhood theme was like quite strong enough for me. The reason it's called The Dutch House is because that's where they like grow up for the first, I don't know, 15 years or so of their lives, and then like stuff happens and then they have to leave. But like, all the major characters of this book all are connected to the house, and that's sort of the thing that like holds them together. Except for then by the end of the book, you realize that like, it's not the house that holds them together, it's their love that all holds them together. And it just was kind of eh. And the best part about it was that Tom Hanks was narrating it, in my personal opinion. So I gave The Dutch House a 2.3 stars. The next book that I finished was The Negotiator by Avery Flynn. This was a ebook that I read. I think it's part of her Harbor City series. Avery Flynn has been on my list to read for a while, but I don't actually think I've ever read anything by her. And I want to. But the problem with The Negotiator was, while I was actually reading it, it was like perfectly light and fine and everything was good. And then the second I finished, I had no memory of this book. I had to read through my notes and was like so happy I took notes, because I had no memory of what happened in The Negotiator. And so I'll tell you, it is a contemporary romance. Right, okay, so it's a contemporary romance. It's like fake dating. It's a fake relationship between Clover and Sawyer. She is, again, this is another like sort of opposites attract story, where he is this rich billionaire. His mother is wanting to set him up with a woman and get him married, matchmake him, because she doesn't want him to like work his whole life away. And he kind of just wants a buffer because he needs to make a couple business deals go through. So he hires Clover, and she's just this like spunky, fun-loving adventurer. And then he claims that she is his fiance to get his mom off his back. And so then they have to like fake it for a while. I felt like it was, I like the writing style. I felt like the sexy times were good. The pacing still was well done, in that they like had enough time to actually be together for feelings to develop. So I appreciated that. I felt like there was, I don't have anything wrong with this book. I felt like the characters were well crafted. I feel like the writing style was good. I feel like the emotional development was there, but all together, I just felt like it wasn't very like memorable, and I had to read through my whole notes to remember it. I did enjoy The Negotiator, and I want to read more by Avery Flynn, but I ultimately just gave this book a 3.5 stars. So the next book that I finished in January was Saga Volume 1. This is written by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. Oh, written by Vaughan and Staples did the art. I read this book like 2017, 2016, a while ago. This is just volume 1. It's a graphic novel. It's definitely meant for an adult audience. There's explicit content both in language and in the pictures. It's really hard to describe a summary, but basically we are following these two main characters, and the narrator is the baby, Hazel. So she's kind of talking about who her parents are and the circumstances surrounding her birth in this volume 1. And there's definitely like he has horns, she has wings, like there's competing groups of people, there's war going on, they're also like robot people, so there's magic, there's war, there's love, there's sex. More will be coming soon on my channel about Saga, so keep an eye out for that. That is all I'm going to say about that. The next book that I finished in January was The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan. This is the 4th book in the Wheel of Time series. I've been doing a Wheel of Time read-along, and it was time for the 4th book. I read like 600 pages of this book, and if you can't tell, this is a chunky boy. This is 1,007 pages long. And I read like 600 of those pages in like 36 hours. And so I was listening to the audiobook and reading along at the same time so that I could finish in time for our discussion. And this is the 4th book in the series, so it's kind of hard to describe the plot, but basically all of our main characters are continuing on their adventures, and they all start together, and then we follow sort of 3 different plot lines as our characters start to go off and do their own things. And so there's a lot more like lore and character development, and I enjoyed it. There's a lot of action in this book, and it's kind of hard to describe. And I gave it a 4.5 stars because I feel like it had a really cool ending, and I'm super looking forward to how all of our characters are going to reconnect going forward. So the second to last book that I finished in January was Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I listened to this on audiobook. I was doing a buddy read for this book with Izzy at Happy For Now and Megan at Meowth Vader. So I will leave links to both their channels down in the description. This was a reread for me, and actually I had listened to the audiobook before, but I super enjoyed this book. I remembered it being really evocative and atmospheric, and I feel like those 2 words still apply. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's like a YA fantasy where we follow they're like monsters and there are angels, and we have Carew as our main character, and she's human, but she has blue hair, and she was like raised by these monsters / demons. And so how does she fit with them? Like, where does she come from? What secrets does she hold? And then there's also magic and this war between like the angels and the demons, and how Carew fits into that story. So I feel like the writing is really the strongest part in this book. I feel like it was really rich in tone and in feeling and emotion, so that it just like really ticks all my buttons. But ultimately, I did not remember how sort of insta-love this story is, and there are a couple, like, I don't want to give away too many spoilers or anything, but like, I don't know, I kind of commented to my friends, I said, you know, I don't really spend that much time together, it's kind of insta-love, and they were like, well, it's YA, and like, it's sort of fated mates, and I agree with both of those statements, but also like, that sort of was a bummer for me, and it definitely ends on a major sort of, I wouldn't say cliffhanger in that you are literally on the edge of your seat, but it ends very unresolved. You definitely have to dive into the next book to continue the story. So we will be continuing with the next book in this series in February. So I was really happy that I reread that, and I gave it 4 stars. The last book that I finished in January was Invisible Girl by Lisa Jewell. this book for the Page Turner Book Club choice for January. Words are hard. And this is a thriller. It is a British thriller. Yeah, it's a British thriller. It's an adult book. I started this book on Friday and our book club discussion was on a Sunday. So I was like, am I going to have enough time? But actually it's a really quick, kind of easy read. And ultimately I felt like it kind of started slow, but it was really laying down and establishing characters. And we follow 3 main points of view. We follow Sapphire, Kate, and Owen. And I definitely, ultimately, overall, I just like wasn't really that thrilled with this book. I didn't find it terribly exciting. And I felt like a little misled from the blurb. Owen is a 30-something-year-old man who is accused of sexual misconduct, and he kind of angrily gets sucked into reading about like incels on the internet, and like, does he identify with this group? Like, what does he do once he reads a lot of that content? But like, that didn't ultimately, in my personal opinion, play a large enough role in the book. It just like was this element of like, ew, gross. And like, it just kind of was like weak. It was just there to like make Owen be creepy. And then Kate was this mom figure, the stay-at-home mom who like lives across the street from Owen and has teenage kids of her own and has a husband, and she is like super suspicious of this guy. But like, Kate's viewpoint, in my opinion, was like the most boring one in the book. She really just functioned to cast suspicion on the other characters. Like, she was suspicious of Owen, she was suspicious of, you know, the following bunch of people. And so her point throughout the book was just like, she would find something and she'd be like, oh, maybe it was that person. And then she'd like learn more information. She'd be like, oh, it was that person. And then, so I just was kind of like, eh. And then there was Sapphire's point of view, and Sapphire is told in first person, whereas the other 2 were told in third person. And we know at the start of the book that Sapphire is missing. So, and her point of view kind of follows time up to like leading to the start of the book when she's missing. So it's like, is she dead? Is she not dead? Like, what happened? Why can they, you know, not find her? Ultimately, I feel like I personally felt like Owen and Sapphire were interesting points of view to read. I felt like they both had some emotional, or not emotional, they both had like personal growth and change. I felt like Kate had less of that. I don't fully love that Kate was the choice for that point of view. I feel like having her husband Roan or her son Josh, or maybe even her daughter Georgia, could have provided a different angle of, you know, a different point of view that would have been a little bit more interesting or a little more thrilling. So yeah, ultimately I just didn't like love this, and I didn't love the resolution. I didn't feel like the twist was really twisty. And I was just kind of like disappointed. So ultimately, I mean, I liked it, but like, it wasn't edge of my seat, wasn't amazing. So I gave Invisible Girl 3.5 stars. So yeah, that was my super rambly and long January wrap up, but I don't care. So those were all my thoughts. That was me reflecting on the month. I had sort of hoped to do a February TBR as part of this video, but that keeps changing day by day and has doubled in length multiple times, because I want to read the next 3 books of the Immortals After Dark series as part of Izzy and Charles's read along for the Immortals After Dark. So I have that planned. I have the buddy read where the next book of Daughter of Smoke and Bone. I want to get started on the next Wheel of Time book. I am in multiple book clubs, so I have those books kind of all ready to go. I also have I'm trying to figure out the best TBR for the Blackathon, Readathon. So I have a secret TBR that I'm trying to vlog for. So I feel like my February books to be read is already too long, and I probably won't get to all those books that I want to read already. So it's too long to put here. Maybe I'll put some graphics here of some books that I'm considering, but I'm not going to talk further about that. So yeah, this was my very long, rambly January wrap up, but check down in the description box for links to all my Goodreads reviews. I try to write a review for every book and include content warnings. I don't feel like most of these have anything that was like really egregious. Thank you for listening to me ramble this whole very long video. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel if you want. Cool. If you don't, also cool. Take care and talk to you soon. Bye. I feel like